All right, thank you. Take it away, Judy.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Wellness Wednesday webinar. That's the 3 W's. Hosted by the First Nations Health Directors Association. I would like to acknowledge the many traditional territories we are all currently collectively gathered today. I'm on the unceded traditional territory of the Secwepemc people. My name is Judy Mays, and I'm the Health Director for Splatcheen Health Services. I became a FNHDA member in June 2016, and I've served on the board since 2019 as the Secretary Treasurer and one of the 3 Interior representatives. I would like to go into introducing the presenter and just a little bit about what we're going to be learning today. As we all know, health directors play an important role in management and delivery of health services and programs in community. This includes administering budgetary and management decisions. They ensure financial management of programs and services, including the accountabilities and the funding agreement requirements of deliverables. Oh, sorry. I'm like, something's happening with my computer, sorry. Technical difficulties in my end. Today we're joined by Wendy Ham. She is from the Aboriginal Financial Officers Association of BC. She brings years of experience and expertise to this topic. She will show us some really helpful ways that we can use the budgets and work plans to bring strategic plans to life. Also looking forward to this. Today's session will also explore how to use performance measures to assess the effectiveness of your programs. There will be an opportunity to ask questions following the presentation, and you can please type your questions in the chat box below. I would like to remind the participants that we're recording this webinar so that we can share with those of you who are unable to join us today. I'm looking forward to learning more about this important topic, so I'll hand it over to Wendy. And Wendy, if you could please take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself before we start.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me here to speak today. Again, my name is Wendy Ham, and I am the Executive Director of AFOABC. We call it AFOABC because Aboriginal Financial Officers Association of BC is a little bit of a mouthful. But yeah, so I am a CPA and a certified Aboriginal finance manager as well. My history is I've been a CPA since, I don't even want to say because it's going to age me, but since 2001. And I have worked in the in the private education sector as well as not-for-profit sector. And I spent 7 years working as a finance director for Sumas First Nation out in the Fraser Valley before becoming the executive director of AFOABC. So with that, I want to just, I'll tell you a little bit more about AFOABC and what we do and how we support capacity development in the BC region. And today we're going to talk a little bit about taking your strategic plans and bringing them to life in a way that that makes some sense to those who are not financial people. So if I use any terminology or anything that you don't find that you don't understand, please feel free to ask because if you don't, probably others don't. And I think that I try and keep it as pretty simple as possible, but just in case, I don't want to, get it too ahead of myself. So I'm going to share my screen and let me go here. Why isn't it? Okay. And let me share that. Can you see my screen? Hopefully.
Yeah,
is
we
there?
can see you. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so the title, our catchy title was Ideas to Dollars, Putting Your Strategic Plan into Action. So we're going to start by, okay. I want to talk a little bit about who is AFOABC. Again, we're the Aboriginal Financial Officers Association of BC. And we've been in operation since 1996, so a long time. It was a number of financial officers who worked in First Nations who saw a need to bring together other like-minded people to try and put together a nonprofit organization to assist in professional development and networking of Indigenous financial managers. Just as you would probably know in the health field as well, working in an Indigenous environment or in a First Nations environment brings some unique challenges, and finance is no different. Working, even though the band is usually a not-for-profit entity, there are profit centers and a variety of unique situations that come into effect. So there was a need to bring these finance officers together and kind of be able to network and talk about those issues that have come up. It's come a long way since then. Since that time in BC, when we started AFOABC, it grew into a national organization. So there is an AFOA Canada, and we are one of their chapters now, and there's chapters across the country. One of the mandates of AFOA Canada is that they actually have certification courses to become a certified Aboriginal finance manager. They do public administration as well as human resources now, and they are looking to do an IT certification as well. So it's grown quite substantially. So our mandate now is inclusive of nation administrators, department managers and directors, elected officials, economic development corporations, and community members. We do financial literacy work within First Nations, and we work with CRA and Indigenous services to bring financial literacy and capacity development to those to community members on reserve, as well as chief and council and staff. So we are a member-driven organization, and so we have more than 300 members here in BC. And so we continue to grow our membership and offerings. We are not exclusive to finance people, lands managers. We have lands managers, we have band managers, we have chief and council who are also members of our organization. And so we just believe that as First Nations are progressing in their efforts to take their rightful place in the economy and self-governance, building internal capacity is more important than ever. One of the things I'm sorry that I forgot to do, I just want to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the unceded territory of the Coquitlam people, and I'm here in Port Moody and the Coast Salish people as well. So I did want to acknowledge that, and I'm sorry I forgot to do that at the beginning. Okay, let's move on. So that's what we do. We do 4 conferences a year. We do on a variety of topics, and you're more than welcome to, go to our website and get on our mailing list, because we do, finance kind of, or finance and capacity development really hit all sectors of a First Nations government. And so we try to provide, really valuable education in human resources, financial just administration, and a variety of topics. So please check us out. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about I know Judy was saying how she hates strategic planning, that she just gets, oh gosh, I have to go to a strategic planning session. Well, and I get that, because strategic planning is really big picture items, right? And so, we have to look at strategic planning as, as kind of the vision, the big picture. And then we're going to take that, and how are we going to take that big picture and drive it down to what we need to do in our everyday work lives, right? So, so we start with the big picture, and we're going to kind of move down, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how do we ensure that what we're doing is successful. And so we can talk about that. And we're also going to talk a little bit about capital projects and how that fits in, especially under the lens of a health director. So let's talk about that. So why do we do planning, right? Why do we do this? Why do we need a strategic plan? Well, I mean, generally, even above a strategic plan comes a comprehensive community plan. I'm sure that many of you have worked in trying to establish that. It's getting your community together and understanding where they want to go and what they want to see and what programs and services are important to them and how they see, the community 7 generations into the future, right? And so we start with this pie in the sky comprehensive community plan. And from there, we break it down into a more strategic plan. And that is really Chief and Council's way of saying, hey, these are our priorities, and we need to take those and make them into reality, right? So that strategic plan then drives everything. It's like you're on a big ship, and you need to all be pointing in the same direction, because even though a comprehensive community plan may have many different facets, you really need to break that down into kind of something that's cohesive so that you can all work in the same direction. You don't want lands going off in one direction and health going off in another, even though like lands may be looking at how are they going to allocate some of the land. You might have an idea for a health building, and they're looking at something totally different, economic development, for example. So there is a real need to make sure that everybody's kind of being steered in the right direction, right? And so that's what the strategic plan does, is kind of gives those overreaching goals. And then you break it down further into departmental business plans. So you take that strategic plan and you break it down into what does that mean to your department, or to health, for example. And from there, when you create that, you're creating financial plans, which are budgets, right? Work plans, which are how you're going to do it. And then evaluation plans. How are you going to measure if you're successful, right? So planning becomes kind of the starting point, and I know it's a little daunting to start into it, but we have to start somewhere. And if you take it out, 5 years, then you can continue to build on it, and that makes it becomes easier. So what starts with a strategic plan leads to the business plan, which is the departmental plan, right? And so a strategic plan, again, is looks into the future. It's like, what do we want our community to look like in 20 years, 7 generations, right? We've got this strategic plan. It reflects the values and the vision of the community. And that's really important, because what you want to do is make sure that what you are doing on the ground each day is really referring back to what are those values and visions that the community has already said that they want, and Chief and Council as well, right? And so with that, then you integrate your programs and your resources to ensure that you're moving in that same direction, right? But it is quite general. And that's where each department kind of comes in and starts to look at, okay, so we've got this, we know what the values are, we know what the vision is, we know kind of what we generally want to do. And so how do we get there? And so that's when we start to build, each department starts to build their business plan. It's a ways and means for strategic plan implementation. So it really kind of guides how you're going to get there and what you're going to do to get there, right? You set specific goals and objectives. It's usually not more than 5 years in duration. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, right? Around that 5 years of 5-year duration and how we can build on that, right? Going forward. So within that, of course, we have to consider financial plans. They're integral to your business plan because, of course, that is one area that has restrictions, finite restrictions. You only have so much money to go around. And so, and everybody, you know, each department is looking at those same dollars or similar dollars to get to where they need to be. We all know that funding is usually not, the funding that we get through transfer payments from the government is usually not enough. We always need more. And that's part of what, you know, First Nations look to do as well, is they build their, you know, their own wealth within their in their government, whether it be through economic development or resources or something like that too, or taxation even, as a way to be able to enhance on the products and services or programs and services that they're delivering, right? So, so what we like to do is we kind of talk about that financial plan as being part of that business plan because it does have a direct effect, right? So what happens when you build this? I mean, you should review these every year. So once you've developed a strategic plan, then it becomes a little bit easier because then you can kind of build on it, right? And look at what you've done and has it been successful in what you're trying to achieve? And do you need to continue down that same path or do you need to pivot somewhat? And I'm sure that everybody this past year knows with the onset of the pandemic, you know, that could have, you know, that whole, everything might have blown up and the strategic plan may have gone totally sideways, but, you know, there's still there's still time, you know, we still have to get back on that track and move that, you know, needle forward kind of as we speak. So these do need to be reviewed annually, and they do need to make sure that you are on the right track and going in the right direction, right? So what comes first? Yeah, that's always, you know, and I think that's the biggest thing when you're talking about big picture items like strategic planning. You know, what comes first? Like, where do you start? And so, you know, once, and I'm going to say, well, you start by working with Chief and Council on that strategic plan. And then once that has been kind of cemented and determined, then you take each part of that and say, you know, ask yourself the question, well, what can I do as a health department? What can I do to contribute to this specific plan? I mean, and I'm going to use this example as throughout this presentation, just because I think it, you know, I mean, I think it's probably pretty safe to say that most First Nations want health and wellness within their community. You know, they want people to live a healthy lifestyle and be well. And you know, this year again has been a challenge to ensure that that's been happening. So, you know, but if we use that, if that is generally what the strategic plan says, well, now we have to look at how are we going to do that, right? So we have to build a business plan. What activities are you going to do that will take place over the next 5 years? For example, you know, what kind of programs, services that you're going to provide, you know, whether that be when you talk health, there's so many options, right? So when you kind of think about, well, what kind of programs and services work well for my community, then you need to build that financial, well, how am I going to do that? And how much money do I need to do that? And that's where your budget comes in. And we like to try or you recommend that you try and do a 5-year budget, which is even more daunting because I know that most of us are, you know, just, oh my God, I've got to get this annual budget done. I just need to get it over with. But there is something to be said about having a good 5-year plan because it gives you a little bit more broader goals and understanding of where you want to get to. So you do a financial plan, and please note that, and I can't stress this enough, budgets are estimates. Nobody is going to say, oh my gosh, you said that you were going to spend this much money and it didn't work. Things change. So budgets are best guess estimates of future events. Things change, things come up. We all know that, especially this year, of how that changes, right? And how things can just go off the rails in a second. So, you know, budgets are something that do change over time. It's something that you should be reviewing almost on a quarterly basis. Not necessarily your 5-year budget, but your annual budget, because your annual budget also is really helpful, becomes a helpful tool for planning in the future. And the further you try to plan out, the less accurate it is, right? Because, you know, you can only, you know, guess what might be happening 5 years from now, but it's only a best guess. So please don't feel like when you are looking at maybe doing a 5-year plan or being asked to do a 5-year plan that that you're expected to be completely accurate. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. So, you know, when building that financial plan, you have to look at your work plan. And I would suggest doing a work plan prior to building your financial plan. So your work plan being what activities are you going to do and when are you going to do them? So how many, you know, if you're going to do a number of workshops, health and wellness workshops, when are you going to do them? What kind of materials do you need? Who's going to teach them? Who's going to facilitate them? Those are the kinds of things. Those are kind of the details. And from there, when you know that, that's when you can start to put your numbers to that. So, and then the one thing that I think we forget about at the end of all this that's really, really important is performance measures and SMART goals. How do you measure the success of the programs and services that you are offering, right? We spend a lot of time on the front end. We need to also spend time on that back end and make sure that we have some really good goals to kind of achieve so that we know whether we're being successful and we're doing what it is that we really want to do. Okay, so let's look at capital budget. So what's a capital budget? What does capital mean? Well, in accounting terms, capital is defined as anything that you purchase that has going to have a useful life that's going to be longer than 1 year. So we talked about capital budgets, and then we talked about operating budgets. Operating budgets are kind of your 1 year budget, what you need to operate during a year. Capital budget is going to be kind of more around your longer term plan. Usually it's larger dollar value. It may take more than 1 year to develop. You know, so capital are usually, yeah, bigger ticket items. They may be a building. They may be, vehicles, right? A fleet of vehicles, or, so there, yeah. So to start with, you should look from a health department. What is it that you want? What would you like to see? Would you, maybe you want a health building, right? Or a health center or a wellness center. That's something that you have to plan for. And, that's going to take a number of years. And so I always suggested that we start with a wish list, right? Start with, okay, let's say that we had all the money in the world and there was no, issues as far as if we could do whatever we wanted when we wanted, what would we do? And make that list, right? Health center might be one of them. I want a fleet of patient travel vehicles that I can, access. There's a variety of things that you might want. Part of your health and wellness may be, not specific to the health department, but it might be, fitness centers or playgrounds for kids, right? I mean, and you may have to incorporate that with public works or some other department, right? But those are kind of those wish lists, and they can be cross-departmental because, nobody works in a silo. Everybody, you've got to incorporate other departments in what you're trying to do, right? And so, I always suggest start with that wish list and then take that wish list and prioritize it. Make priorities, which is most important. And that's when your strategic plan comes into play too, is what's most important to the community and chief and council, right? They may say that, that the number one thing is a health center, right? A wellness center. Or they may say, no, we really want some, soccer fields, right? Who knew? Who would have thought? I know that we were looking when I worked at Sumas, we were looking at soccer fields. They cost $2 million. Like, I couldn't believe it, right? But there's drainage to consider. There's there's so many things to consider when building a nice, good soccer field. It's, I had no idea, right? But that's part of that growing process, right? And the importance is that capital will drive operating expenses, right? And even revenue sometimes as well. If you build a wellness center, perhaps you're going to have some office space for some, other organizations to be able to work out of, and you may be using that as revenue to bring in for office space. So you have to look at all of those things because those are going to drive, those expenditures and revenue, right? So it's important to kind of think of all of those things when you're trying to plan this. So let's look at an example, right? So, say one of your capital budget items is that you need a new van for patient travel. So if you replace that and you get a new van, then what's that going to do to your operational expenditures, right? Well, if you have an older van, say your van that you're using is 10 years old, it probably needs a lot of upkeep. It might need repairs. It may need new tires. It may need, a variety of things, right? It might not be that great on gas. So all of those things must be taken into consideration. So when you get a new van, those operational expenses may go down for a while, right? For a number of years. So, your operating costs may go down for a number of years due to the replacement of to a new van, right? So, do operating costs aren't increased, they're decreased. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my little slide here and I'm thinking that's a little bit confusing, and I'm sorry for that, and I will fix that. But I would say that operational costs would go down, not up, for a new van. So let's look at another example, a new house building. So once, so if that's one of the things that you're looking to do, that's a bigger project and that's going to take a lot more. And I actually am using that as an example further on in this presentation. So, you have to consider operational costs for the building. If you're replacing it with an older from an older building, you're building a new one, what are going to be the operational costs for that building on a go-forward basis? And program costs, what are you going to do in there? So what kind of programs can you enhance? What kind of program, that you may be able to make better, when you have a new health building, right? So those are just a couple of examples under capital budgets that you kind of need to think about, right? When you're doing your capital budget. So capital budgeting, well, it just in general, it should be 5 to 10 years looking out, because yes, you can buy a car in one fiscal year, but you can't really build a house building in one fiscal year. That takes a few years of planning, and we will talk about that. And this is kind of the piece that's really, this is where the optimism, the jazz gets built, right? Is that this is something that you can go to the community and say, hey, guess what? We're going to be doing this, and you guys have said this is what you want. Well, guess what? We're going to make that a reality. And so it does get people excited, they start to see the construction or something like that. And that sort of starts to build optimism within the community. And this is where the community can see, oh yeah, so we said we wanted something like that in our comprehensive community plan. And look, it's now become a reality. So that's why it's, the capital budgeting is really important. And there's so many different capital items that I'm sure as a First Nation, the leadership is looking towards. And so the big thing is that you have to be strategic on when you can afford to build these things. And so it has to fit into a greater scheme. As you can't do everything at once, of course, because you've got limited resources, not only resources monetarily, but resources human, right? Human resources. Do you have the people who can actually do this job and build this building and ensure that the infrastructure is there and all of those things? So it is important that you work together as a team, moving that ship forward slowly. All right, so then let's move on to operating budgets. So operating budgets, it's recommended to try and do a 5-year operating budget. Again, I'm going to say that is, the accuracy of it exponentially goes down the further out that you go, but it is something that should be created after you've created your capital budget. So because there are going to be costs that you have to think about. right? As we've talked about. So first time you do an operating budget is usually the toughest. And so one of the things, I know that finance is always really anal about, making sure that when you are allocating, especially throughout the year, you get an invoice across your desk and you have to, I assume that most of you have to code it, and, you've got an account code that you need to use, and it needs, and you get tired, you forget what the account codes are, and it drives you nuts. I get that. But it is really important. And it's really important because it helps you. If you get, so as you go along, you are actually building your next year's budget by coding all of those details to those departments or those codes that give you your actuals, right? So when you're building your first one's going to be tough because if you've never done it before, you're not really sure what goes into those different account codes. But once you've done that, then the actuals that you code every day become the basis of your next year's budget. And so we talk about finance being kind of, you have to look at the past to determine the future, right? And who is it? One of the ladies I work for is, she used to always use this statement that past behavior is indicative of future behavior, right? So whatever happened in the past is really indicative of what the future is going to bring. And, it's the same thing is that you learn from your mistakes, right? If you don't learn from your mistakes, you'll repeat them. You're apt to repeat them. Well, it's the same thing for budgeting, right? If you get it, if those everyday invoices that you are signing off are going to be really, really important for you to be building your future year's budget. So I'm going to just give that nugget for you to remember when you get really mad at finance for making you pull out the GST and or such, and or they are you sure you want this to this? Is this the right code that you're allocating this to? They're only doing it to help you so that you'll make it easier for you as time goes on. So. And as I said, know that the further out you go, the less accurate it may be, of course, right? And you have to rely on your finance department to give you information, right? So your CFO needs to provide parameters. They need to tell you what kind of, like going out 5 years, best way to start is you don't use the same number 5 years in a row. You assume that there's going to be inflation. Your CFO should be able to tell you what you as an your organization or your band government is going to, as a whole, use as an inflation. Is it 2%? Is it 2.5%? They are the ones who should be able to tell you that, and you can just build that into your budget template. Just an automatic 2 or 2.5% increase to your expenditures for assumed inflation over time, right? The other thing that they should give you is detailed wage information. Nobody expects you to do all of that, or I don't think you should be, because there's so many nuances in payroll and wage information, such as vacation pay, benefits, pension, all of those things that need to be incorporated, because it's not just what you pay that person, it's everything else that goes into it, right? And there's other things when you need to think about when you're hiring somebody, like they need a desk or an office and a telephone and a computer. And so there's other expenses that are directly incurred by hiring new staff, right? So yeah, finance should be the one, that's what their job is to figure all that out and give you that number. Administration fees. This is always a fun one. I know that people don't like these, but there are what we call economies of scale. So, the health department doesn't buy office supplies onto its own. The band government as a whole can buy, paper or, pens, and they can get, for buying it in larger bulk, they get a cheaper price. That's what we kind of assume it, or call economies of scale. So it's really important that, so finance will figure out a formula of which to divide those things, like a photocopier lease, for example. You may have 3 photocopiers that are used by the whole band office, right? How does that get allocated to your budget? So those are the things that finance will figure out, and they will kind of give to you. And you have every right to say to them, how did you arrive at this? Like, how are you calculating this? And make sure that it makes some sense. And I think it's the responsibility of their finance team to be transparent about how they come up with those numbers, right? So insurance is another one. We all have, the band office needs to be insured for liability and all of those things. And that needs to actually also be something that gets included into your operating budget. So, but those are all things that I think what I'd like for you to take away from this slide is that, really, you don't have to figure all this out. You just need to know what questions to ask. And this is, so what I want to be sure that we're insured. What does that cost to me? And those are the questions that you need to make sure that you know to ask, and when you're building your budget. So so one of the things that I was really bad for, and it's like I would spend all this time, and I had my little piece of paper, and I would be scratching out calculations and adding up numbers, and then I would get to a figure, and I would go, okay, this is it. This is my budget number, right? And then 2 months later, I'm like, how did I get to that number? I forget, and I didn't write it down, and I can't get back to it again, and I'm confused. And so I would strongly recommend that if you are doing a budget, and what I used to do in a template when I gave it out to the department managers, I had kind of the front Excel spreadsheet was a wrap up, which just had the totals, but behind it, there were spreadsheets that you could put detail in, and you put your numbers in, and then that would roll up into that number at the top, right? Or on the first page. So it really helps you to make, and Kimberly Lang, I worked with her at SUMAS for many years, and she was great. She'd have huge lists she'd have individual names worked out, right? It was quite, so she was very good at making sure that she had all of that information so that she knew how she got to that number. So, but that's really, if that's one takeaway, make sure that you keep notes. Consider fixed and variable costs. What are fixed and variable costs? Fixed costs are costs that you incur no matter what. A fixed cost would be a photocopier lease. No matter how many, so this is a great example. A photocopier, the lease amount is fixed. It will be the same amount each year for perhaps 5 years down the road. But you also will have probably a maintenance agreement on a photocopier, and that maintenance agreement is going to be calculated based on the number of copies that you make, a number of color copies versus black and white copies, right? So those are what we call variable costs, because they will change dependent on how much you do or how much you use it, right? And so that's just a good example of what's the difference between fixed and variable. So when you're thinking about costs associated with programs and services, think of what are those items that are kind of fixed, they're going to be the same no matter what, and what might change over, dependent, right? Like if you do a workshop and you have, a wellness workshop, and you may say, okay, well, I'm going to limit that to 20 people in this workshop, in each workshop, right? That's fine. So you budget based on 20 people times however many workshops you're going to do. But if you take that out and you go, oh, well, no, I'm going to increase that to 30, are there going to be costs that are going to increase because you've increased the number of people? So those are kind of, ideas to think about. So you look for economies of scale. I talked about that a little bit earlier. And economies of scale with other departments, if there are things that you need and maybe another department also needs, maybe if you combine forces, you can get a cheaper rate on things. So you got to look for that, and your finance department should help with that because they usually know what other departments are looking at. So and they also should consider that when they're building budgets, right? Managers usually know best what is needed. That's right. That's why you get to do the budget, because finance doesn't know what you want to do, and they're not the ones who are doing it, right? So you are the experts of your department, and so you look, and if you don't know what that cost is going to look like, well, get help. Ask for help. So, and that's what finance is there for. They're there to be able to help you deliver that or help you figure out how much that's going to cost. So, you know what's best in your head, what you need, but they are there to support you and help you achieve that. Do we have any questions? I can't see the chat. So are there any questions or comments? Kim, Judy, is there anything, are there any questions or comments?
No questions so far.
Okay. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put your hand up, right? Or put your questions in the chat. Okay, well, I will keep going then. So one thing, so as I said earlier, budgets are not like, they're a best guess, right? So there should be a point in time within the year that you may need to look at budget adjustments, right? Something has happened. The obvious one is the pandemic hits, right? And everybody's, that just probably threw your budgets right out the window. But there are always going to be budget adjustments. And that's why it's important to look at your budgets at least quarterly, look at what's in them, where you're at, whether your best guess was accurate or not, and so, maybe you might find that one of your budget line items is really high and another is really low. There are lots of options available, and that's where you have that discussion with your CFO is around, you can, if you do find that the accuracy of your budget is because of issues out of your control or assumptions that were made that didn't work out, you can reallocate your funds, right? So if you have, one area where you expected to spend $10,000 and right now you're only at $2,000, and you kind of go, well, I'm not going to spend $10,000. You might put that to another program, if you can, to another program to even it up, to say, you know what, I'm going to move some of these funds from over here to over here to be able to make it so it's not going to change my bottom line. It's just moving it from one service or one program to another. you may have to look at, oh, well, I might not be able to do as many workshops as I thought because it came in at a higher number than I anticipated. You know, you might even, and you don't have this ability, but Chief and Counsel has ability to perhaps even approve a deficit in your department. I know that most actually, when I was a finance manager, most of our programs and services departments ran into a deficit because there's never enough money to support everything that we want to do. But that's why bands have own source revenues to be able to pull from one place to another. So work with your finance department, and they are usually able to let you know if you can actually, you may be able to go over budget, right? And be in a deficit situation. Or you might get, and I'm sure you all are keenly aware of this, that this year, right? That there were so many new funds that kind of came down the pipe because of the pandemic. And there were, many organizations or funding dollars new funding dollars that you didn't expect to get. So those are kind of some ways that budgets can be adjusted throughout the year. Okay, so now let's get out of budgets and let's talk a little bit about performance measures and SMART goals. Performance measures are really important.
Sorry, Judy did have a question.
Yes.
So it's, do you have to do adjustments by GL or the relocation?
You either. That would be dependent on what the issue is, right? So, GLs, if your budget is done through your GL and you see that you want to do, you have you're going to have a surplus in one GL code and a deficit in another, you may want to use that. If it's new funds, you can reallocate, or you can just add to it. There's a variety of different ways, but budget adjustments will be dependent on why you are why you are in that deficit, or you need to make that change, right? But you can do it either way. There's a variety of ways that you can look at adjusting those budget numbers. Does that help?
Her follow-up question is, does it have to be exact or one lump sum?
Oh, no, it doesn't have to. It's never exact. It's never exact. So, I mean, as I said before, it's a best guess. And so, as long as you, as a health director, you'll have a pretty good understanding of how you're coming to your numbers, and it's the best guess. It's, things change, you never know, right? And so it doesn't have to be exact. Budgeting isn't an exact science. What you use to budget will be based on, past experience or, just your general knowledge. So it's never going to be exact. And if it is exact, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anything that's like dead on. So it's a best estimate. So I would never expect things to be exact. But it's the monitoring of it so that you just look at the nuances, right? And with discussion with finance and your chief and counsel, you'll get a pretty good idea of what's important, how much of a variance is important. But there's always going to be variances. It's never going to be cut and dry. So let's move on to, I'm cognizant of the time here, so I'm going to move on to performance measures. So one of the things that I think that we don't do, and it isn't easy. So please note that when I talk about this, it's really something that is not necessarily that easy to do, but I think it's really important that you try and figure out whether, how to measure the success of your programs and services, right? So we're going to talk about quantity and quality over effort and effect. So performance measures, you know, is like, we look at it in this kind of like this box, right? Your effort and quantity and your effort and quality, and the effect and quantity and the effect and quality, right? So if we're looking at a service, for example, your effort is how much service did we deliver? And that is measurable by quantity, right? How many workshops did we deliver, right? How many you know, doctor's appointments did we have available, right? But then you need to look at, okay, but you know, we might have had a ton of them, you know, of workshops, but how well did we deliver them, right? Were they successful, right? I think that's the more difficult thing to measure. How do you measure quality, right? It's kind of a percentage, or so how do you measure that, right? It's just the same as, okay, so you put out this effort. Now, what is the effect of the effort, right? So, you know, what is the effect of the workshops? What, you know, how much change did we produce? If we're, and we'll use an example coming up, right? And that will be how much change did we produce? And then the quality, what quality of change? Like, we might have effected of a change, but what if it was a change to the detriment, right? Like to the worst. So those are, you know, it's something that you have to think about, because that's going to that's going to help you decide what you're going to do going forward, right? So performance measures need to be in work plans. And these are the questions that you should ask. How much did you do and how well, right? That's quantity. How much did you do? How well did you do it, right? Effectiveness. Did you have an effect, the effect that you were striving for, right? So either you had an effect, was it a positive effect, right? Or did you advance the strategic objectives? So you had an effect. Did that effect work in concert with your strategic objectives, right? So those are kind of some of the questions you need to ask yourself. And then you have the economy of it. Did you do it on budget, right? And I know this is sometimes really difficult because it's hard to get other organizations' information, but with associations, just as, you know, a health directors association, you guys get together, you know, did you ask, how did that work for you guys, right? That's some way that you can kind of get some idea of whether, you know, what you are doing, did it compare to what others are doing in similar, you know, in similar instances. And you know, it's really quite amazing when you get together and you network and you talk about that kind of stuff, that really comes out that you learn, you know, what others do well, right? So always good to network that way, right? So let's use an example of a wellness workshop, right? So you decide that you're going to do a bunch of wellness workshops, whatever those wellness workshops look like. Okay, so we look at what effort are we going to put into it? Well, how many so maybe you want to measure, you know, the quantity, how many community members attended, right? That's you might have 10 workshops and you can fill 20 each. Was it the same people coming back time and again? Were it all different people? How many people actually attended? So that would be a good measure of quantity. But quality, how do you measure the quality, right? So maybe you do an evaluation or a survey of the attendees about how they felt after, you know, and ask directed questions. You know, did you feel better? Were you sick less, right? You know, and so, you know, you can ask targeted questions that you can then compare over time, as, you know, if 65% said yes, they felt better after doing the workshop, And the next, the next time it's 75, right, percent. So then you look at the effect, right? So, or another one under the quality side of things is how much did they enjoy the workshops? Would they come back? That would be another really good question to ask for quality, right? Because under the effect, the measure would tie into the strategic plan. If your strategic plan says they want, the community members to be healthier and well, and live a healthy lifestyle. So you're doing these wellness workshops. Yeah, were fewer members sick? Maybe from a quantity perspective, you could look at as a performance measure. And you may do in your quality surveys, how many members said they have fewer doctor visits, right? As a measure of quality of what you were doing. So you have to be creative, but those are some of the things that you can think about when you're trying to tie it into your strategic plan. So effect and effort. One of the things are where you're going to look at, developing your goals, right? And I'm sure that a lot of you, if you've done these kinds of seminars before, you've heard of SMART goals. And SMART goals stands for specific, measured, achievable, relevant, and time sensitive. When you are setting these goals for performance measures, these are the things you need to think about, right? These goals need to be specific. What are you trying to measure? Who is affected, right? It needs to be quite specific so that you know what you're trying to do, what you're trying to find out, right? Measured, you need to be able to measure the results. How are you going to measure the results? If you can't measure them, how do you know if you are successful, right? You have to make them achievable. That's the biggest thing. You can't go in and say, well, we're going to achieve 100%. That's it. That's the only way that we're successful. And that's not fair. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to anybody who's trying to do. You are trying something new, perhaps. It doesn't have to be 100%. It needs to, but you want to be able to see you want it to be able to see that it's getting better, right? Because otherwise, why are you doing it? So you need to be realistic in your in setting those goals to be achievable. You need to make sure, because there's nothing worse than setting goals that are unachievable, and everybody knows that, right? They know that they're not going to be able to achieve them. So what is the point? So you want to make sure that you set achievable goals. I'm going to use it, actually, the funniest one that really resonated with me is that I remember when, I'm going to use this as it's in the US, right? Joe Biden comes in, he says, I'm going to get 100 million vaccines in arms in my first 100 days. And you had all of these media outlets, half of them going, well, that's not a very good, that's just, what the heck, they should be able to do that easily. And others going, oh my God, what is he thinking? And, he achieves that within the first, 58 days, right? And now everyone's going, wow, that's really great, right? At least, he set a goal and he achieved it. The fact that he may have, over-delivered, and underestimated, that's okay. It's okay to do that. Because then at least you feel there's an accomplishment, right? So I use that just as an example of something that, make it achievable. And when you bypass it, then celebrate it, right? So another thing to consider is relevance, right? So you need to know what it is you want to measure, and make sure that the goal that you're setting accomplish what you're trying to do. So does it mesh with the strategic plan? Is it relevant? And time sensitive, right? So usually you want to look at a SMART goal in a 1 year increment? Did you, because you want to be sure that you're not going along the path that you don't go and measure for 3 years down the road and then find you're not achieving what you wanted to, right? So make it time sensitive so that you know what you're trying to achieve and when. Okay, so let's use a wellness workshop as a SMART goal, right? So we have the effort. So the effort is going to be, we've got quantity. We're going to have 20 members at our wellness workshop, 1 day a week, 50 weeks per year. And our goal is going to be 90% occupancy. So we want to make sure that these workshops that we do, we're going to do 50 workshops per year. We're going to have 900 workshop spots that we want filled, right? We're not going for 100%, but we think we can get 90% filled, right? So right there is a goal, right? So you will measure success if you get on average, 90% occupancy, right? Quality, right? The quality of the effort. So a survey of attendees, let's take a look at whether they enjoyed the workshop and they would come back again. Last year, let's say the surveys that you did showed an 80% satisfaction ratio. Maybe this year you're going to go for an 85%, right? Just a little bit higher than what you had last year. You're just going to make them a little bit more, you're hoping to get a little bit more satisfaction out of it. And that would be a SMART goal that you would have for these wellness workshops, right? And then the effect, is it doing what you expect it to, right? And so you need a measure to tie into your strategic plan, right? So maybe you're going to go, okay, well, how do we measure the effect of these workshops? We might want to measure it against the available doctor's appointments, right? So last year there were 500 available doctor's appointments and 90% were filled, right? That the doctor had 90% of his doctor appointments filled. This year, maybe you're going to say, we're going to try for 85%, because if they're going to the doctor less, that means that they are perhaps healthier. I mean, this is just an example, but I know there are other things to think about when you're considering this. This is an example. You might want to make it a little bit more compact, but that would certainly, but that's just one way to kind of set a goal, right? And then things can change, right? Pandemic, yeah, right? Okay, that 85% might go out the window because of something like this happening, but that's totally out of your control. So, there's, it's not always this isn't an exact science. So also, you might want to measure quality. Last year, 60% of attendees said they felt better after attending the workshop. This year, you want to say that 65%, or that they feel healthier in overall, right? So these are all measures that you can look at, right, for your SMART goals. But they, again, SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time sensitive or time bound. Okay, so on to the last piece. Anybody have any questions about SMART goals and performance measures?
No questions so far.
All right. Either I'm doing a really good job at explaining everything, or you guys are falling asleep. I can't see anybody.
You're doing a great job.
So, I hope that that's the case. Anyways, real life examples. So I'm going to use, I'm going to look at this. So for a strategic goal, let's say that you wanted to have a fully operational health center. So these are the questions you need to ask. And when I talk about this, I mean, I was talking to Kim earlier, and we were talking about when we were both at SUMAS, and we were talking about this education center that they were building, and Kim got put into kind of being the project manager, and she was just like, why am I, like, I don't know anything about construction. And that's the thing, right, is that you need to make sure that you have people who know what they're doing, engineers and and construction people. And, you know, just because you're the project manager doesn't mean you have to know everything. You just have to know what questions to ask, right? And so when we talk about a strategic goal and taking this and how are we going to make it a reality, here are some of the questions you might want to ask yourself when you're starting off on this journey, right? Is, okay, we want a fully operational health center. Well, what does that look like, right? What services are you going to provide? How big will it be? How many offices do you want? How many staff do you have to accommodate in it? You know, what, are you going to have dentists in there? Are you going to have just, you know, doctors' offices? Are you going to maybe rent out office space to other service, you know, social service organizations? Are you going to, you know, there's a lot of questions that you're going to have to look at in your pre-planning stage, right? In determining that, right? Then you need to ask yourself, well, when do you want it operational by? Because this takes a number of years. As we know, I mean, the education center that we were building up in Sumas, as an example, you know, we started with a date, which I think when it finally became operational was 3 years after we had originally said we wanted to do it, right? So be realistic about, you know, when do you want it operational by? Because there's a lot of budget considerations and other considerations that you have to think about when you set that date, right? How long will it take, right? Where are you going to put it, right? Is it on CP land? Is it on band-owned land? Are you going to ATR it, you know, addition to reserve? You need to, you know, you may need to get integration with your lands department, right? What do they require? What about, you know, permitting and all of that? How is that going to, you know, affect it? Infrastructure availability. Public Works is going to need to know, or you got to have sewer and water and all of those things, right? And does the piece of land where you're going to put it, does it have those services? Do you have a road going to it? Like, there's so many things to think about, right? When you're looking at that. So this is all, you know, and how are you going to pay for it, right? Are you getting funding? Are you getting partially funding? Are you going to need to finance it? But what I think I want you to get from all of this is that though this would be a health center or a health and wellness center that is going to, you know, that you'll be directly involved in, you need to bring in a variety of people to work together on this. You'll need finance, you'll need land, you'll need, you know, public works, you'll need, you know, so there's a whole variety of things to think about that you will probably want, you know, input into, you know, especially what does it look like, what kinds of services you want, and does it fit to your strategic plan, right? So you need to consider all of those things. So what I recommend is that you determine a 5-year time horizon. You know, okay, so this is what we want to do. Okay, so year one, we're just going to do the pre-planning. We're just going to talk about all of those questions that I just brought up in that previous slide, you know, and then you need to start talking about, well, what are the costs to the health department? What are costs to lands? What are costs to public works? What are the infrastructure costs? And how does that fit into all of those pieces, right? So you may just spend the first year just planning on that, right? And then in year two, you may go, okay, well, they're going to start construction. What does that mean? What effect does that have on the health department? What kind of costs am I going to incur? Construction costs may not be allocated to the health, to health, but you may have some costs that are directly associated with this whole process, right? So it might even be just your time, right? Your time and considerations, that kind of consideration. Year three, construction is continuing. Now you have to think of, oh, well, we're going to have a playground outside? Are we going to have parking? You know, all of those things that as construction happens, there's always going to be changes and always going to be questions, and that you need to think about, right? And then year 4, you know, okay, we're just about finished construction now. What do I need for staffing? Am I going to need more staff? What programs am I going to offer? You know, we've already decided what programs. I better start thinking about how those are going to affect my budgets and all of those things and such. And then how am I going to measure those, right? What about operational costs? I'm going to have to incorporate those into the maintenance, right, of that building if that health center is going to become part of my budget. So you have to start considering all of those kinds of things. And then it makes it fairly simple to just integrate them into your operational budget. And it's not going to be perfect. You know, you may not have estimated correctly on heating costs or, you know, air conditioning costs or, you know, utility, stuff like that. But it is a best guess when you're dealing with something new. And so you talk to people who can give you that best guess, right? And it's always bringing others in to help you. So lots to think about when you're doing these big capital projects for sure, but you know, it's kind of part of what you're looking at when you're planning, trying to integrate that with those big strategic plans. So finally, looking to the future. I love this because, you know, this quote, here's what I know about the future. It happens as a result of what we do today. So, you know, that is so true, right? Is what we do today is a best determination of what's going to happen tomorrow, right? If we don't do anything, then the likelihood of anything happening in the future is pretty low, right? So we need to look at that, and we need to have strategic, you know, clear strategic goals. Your chief and council need to provide clear strategic goals so that you are able to then realize those goals, right? So let's, you know, just as a recap, you need to start with a wish list, like a pie in the sky wish list, and then fit those puzzle pieces together as to priorities and dollars and all of those things. Partner with other departments. I can't say this enough. I can't, you know, you're not in a silo, and you know, though you have specific direct needs, I think that it's really important to build relationships with these other departments so that you can ensure that you're all working on that ship going in the same direction. Think about innovative ways to achieve your goals. So, you know, when I talk about SMART goals and performance measures, you know, think outside the box. Think of interesting things, you know, ways that you can achieve what you're looking to achieve. You know, health and wellness is it's a very broad definition, right? And it means different things to different people. So I think it's you know, you need to think outside the box a little bit on how you achieve those goals, and set those performance measures and SMART goals. It really is important to try and measure whether you're being successful or not, and that it's working. And then when it is, celebrate those successes. That was one thing that we always talked about at SUMAS, was like, we need to celebrate our successes more, because people weren't even, you know, sing it from the rooftops, you know, have an annual meeting with your community and tell them what you did. Tell them what goals you've set and how you've achieved them. Celebrate those successes. Those are, you know, that is one thing that I think we don't do enough. And it is a great way it's a great motivator of staff. And it makes you feel good about what you're doing and the difference that you're making. So, and with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for your time, and I'm going to stop sharing. This is my, if you ever want to give me a call, please feel free, or that's my email address. You can contact me at any time. If you have questions or want to talk about any of the things that we talked about today, please feel free to contact me. Thanks.
Thank you, Wendy.
Oh.
I don't see any questions in the chat. I do see a note that somebody did say that you were doing a great job explaining. At least,
well, good. I hope so.
At least one person was not asleep. No, just kidding.
It's so hard when you do it in a webinar, right? Because you just can't see anybody, and so it's hard just talking to this little webcam that's sitting up here. But
there is one question, Wendy. He wants to know if you have any templates for work plans or like anything that would help people as to where you start.
Yeah, I certainly can direct you in the right place. I know the First Nations Finance Management Board has some great templates for budgeting, and I can certainly I'll pass over to you, Kim, the website, right, where you can get in touch with them. But yeah, so there's some that are really helpful and things to think about. And I, actually in preparing for this, it made me think about that a little bit more too. And I am in the process of putting together something that might be helpful. So if any of you are looking for some of those templates, if you just let Kim know, or provide an email address, when I have those completed, I can forward them over to you so that you can have some ideas of or give you some tools, right? Tools are always helpful.
Tools are always helpful. Yeah, and I'll note too, one of the communities is mentioning that they are in the feasibility, that lovely feasibility study process, and wondering if you have any words of wisdom.
Yeah. Well, what can I say about feasibility studies? Well, I'm not an expert on this. This was one area that I would just, because it's usually, kind of pie in the sky ideas. I'm trying to think of where you could go, or, generally, I mean, are these for a variety of capital projects, that feasibility study process is whether it's feasible or not? Is that the idea?
I would assume so, yes.
Right. Yeah,
It's
and
a center.
I guess I would use much the same. I would recommend that you use a lot of the same, tactics as that we were talking about with performance measures. What do you want to achieve, right? And what would that, is it, feasible, but also kind of try and ask yourselves the same questions that you do around your SMART goals, or around those performance measures, is what are you trying to do? And, what will be the cost in doing it? And is that, and maybe even try and I would work with your finance department on this, is that how would you measure that cost? Like measure the success of that, right?
The only thing I would add to that, sorry, Wendy, is that I worked for a couple communities in my years working as a health director and in community. And when Wendy talks about sort of, you make your plan today, you commit to your plan today, and maybe you open your doors in three years or something from now, that's where it's really important to think, take how much storage space you think you need and double it, and assume that you're going to have more staff, tomorrow than you have today. Or a lot of times we build for what we need today, and by the time it comes to fruition, we've already outgrown our, Sumas, we did that too, right? We got in a new administration office that felt like so huge because it moved administration out of the health center. And by the time the administration office was open, it was already full, and we were looking again for more space.
Right.
People, yeah.
Yeah, and that's, when you talk about feasibility study, that's the kind of thing, is that you've got to prepare or you've got to look at it not from today, but, you know, 10 years down the road, what do you expect, right? And what does that look like? And it might not be, and what can you do in the meantime? Like if you're, you know, if you're looking at a health center, right? What do you want to include in it? What would you eventually like to include in it, right? And you might not get that today, but what could you do? Like, for example, and I'll use the health center as an example, is that you might build it larger than you need today. Maybe you can rent out space, right? Maybe you can rent out space that you don't need today that you might need in 3 or 4 years. So maybe you can make a revenue stream out of it, right? Think of that idea, right? Is how can you build something that may be larger than what you need today, but how can you pivot it so that maybe you can generate some revenue, maybe you can do something in the meantime that might be helpful, and then as you grow it, you can, you know, fill it up, so to speak. So yeah, it's never easy. I know that, but you know, I mean, I think there's lots of innovative and kind of interesting ways to think about it. For sure.
I don't see any other questions, and I know we are up against the
okay. Oh, I see. I just saw a note in the chat saying that they're in the community engagement. So, you know, a community engagement part, that, you know, remember what we did in SUMAS, one of the things, because one of the things that I was responsible for was the fun topic of taxation. And so, you know, nobody wants to talk about taxation, right? And it was property tax on reserve. And it wasn't for the members, but they you know, getting them to get their mind around what that means to them. And what it means to them is that if we got in taxation dollars, then we could build stuff that would benefit the community, right? And so part of the community engagement piece that we did was we did a survey. So if you could build anything on reserve that you wanted, what would you want? We got everything, a skateboard park. You know, we had the teenagers were the huge ones, right? They wanted a skateboard park. They wanted soccer fields. They wanted, you know, basketball court, right? And all of those things. And so that's, you know, when you talk about feasibility, I think that is a really important part of it. And that's why when I talked, even in my presentation, about wish lists, right? The sky's the limit. What do you want? And it's amazing what people come up with. But, you know, for us, the biggest thing that always came up was soccer fields. Who knew that soccer fields cost $2 million, right? Right? But it's a great opportunity for getting the community to really think about what it is that they really want, and whether that, you know, and it also goes to help manage expectations, right? Managing expectations about what that community, because they could want all of these things, but it could be way out there as far as whether that's even going to be a feasible alternative. So that communication is so important, and, you know, do it in such a way that you can be transparent and communicate that information back and forth between the community is incredibly important too. Oh, you're on mute.
I just did the Zoom thing a year in, and I'm still doing that.
I know, we all are.
I'm seeing that a couple of people are needing to jump off the call. So I'm hoping that Judy is available to come and close us out. And thank you so much, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Kim.
I sure am, and I've taken my picture off. I was sweating bullets when Wendy was talking, so don't want you to all see that. Anyway, just a little short summary from the information, which I found incredible. Now I don't feel so scared of strategic plans. I am more of a detailed person, so a strategic plan to me is like very scary. So bringing life to strategic plans was a really good way to talk about the planning and the priorities and how we get there. That was, you know, some of your phrases you used was to me so enlightening, and I was less anxious. So I really liked how you did that. I loved the stuff about the capital budget defining and the operation budget and the budget adjustment pieces. That was my favorite. Performance measure, I definitely think is my weakest now. So
I know they're hard. They are hard, but
they really are.
But they're good to do.
Yeah, right? And you did an incredible job, you know, taking these great, big, huge ideas and words and bringing it to life, to understand at the level that some of us need to understand, for myself in particular. I also noticed that your organization has many training opportunities, and I know we didn't get into that, but I don't know what the cost or anything is. I also understand and wanted to see if there was any possibility of mentoring or tutoring opportunities from your organization.
Absolutely, that we'd be happy to, and we do. You know, a lot of my presentation was taken from one of the workshops that I actually facilitate. It's a 2-day workshop on the essentials of financial management that has been really successful. And one of the things we talk a lot about budgets and that part, but we also talk about we also take the financial statements of your band, and we go through them and we teach you how to read them, which is I think a really help. And I know every time I do that, I mean, it just is so helpful, because now they understand how, you know, taking those numbers that mean nothing and putting them into something that means something is really useful. So yes, we do a lot of training. We will do them either virtually. We will come into your community and do it for your staff. We do regional ones. You know, we're always looking at ways that we can help. And for me, my personal goal is not just finance people, but helping every department understand how they fit into the scheme of things with that. I'm not a finance person. You don't need to be a finance person. All you need to know are who to go to and what to ask.
I also learned that there's a lot of stuff that our finance people should be doing and I shouldn't be. So that was really eye-opening, and there was so much information.
Oh, am I going to get in trouble with them now?
I'm going to say Wendy's sad.
Wendy's sad.
What was really good was, and I think this happens in First Nation communities, is a lot of time the strategic priorities that are put forward by governance is way different when it comes down to actually putting stuff into action. So that was also very enlightening. And now I don't feel so uncomfortable about that when I say, no, we're not going to get escape part. I'm sorry. Yeah. So on behalf of the FNHDA, I would love to extend and thank Wendy for everyone that was present today on behalf of our team and our shared secretariat and our organization. To have the BC team taking time to present to us was very, very informative. I'd also like to thank everyone for your participation on chat. And I know it was a little bit short for everyone because there was so much to digest. We probably all have questions after. We hope you'll join us for the April 7th for our next Wellness Wednesday webinar, where the FNHA funding arrangements team will be back and they'll be discussing budget, which is awesome. It'll flow right nicely from what Wendy has given us today. And until then, enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe and stay well. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.